All right. Welcome to round 5 of the NZ Schools Debating Championship. The motion is this house regrets parent influencers, I think. Speaking times is 7 to 8 minutes with POIs between the first and 7th minute. I will clap. Do I have to clap?
Just use the bell.
I'm going to use the bell app. So there'll be a bell that will go off at 1 minute and at 7 minutes and twice at 8 minutes. We'll start the round with an introduction of the judges and speakers with your names and pronouns if you wish, though you do not have to. For example, my name is Jamie and my pronouns are he, him. Starting with Sumner. Starting with the Edge.
Hi, I'm Sumner. I prefer pronouns he, him.
My name is Alex. I'm first and leader, so my pronouns are he, him.
My name is Kadal. My pronouns are he, him.
Hi, I'm Joanne. My pronouns are he, her, and he's
G'day, Riley, first speaker, pronouns he, him.
Hello, I'm Manukau, second reply, he, him, pronouns,
I'm Connor, third speaker.
Alright. Without further ado, I now welcome up the first speaker to begin their team's case.
Easy. Okay, sweetie, smile for the camera. Give me a nice big smile. Go on then, do the splits. Go on. Did you like that? No, I'm gonna assume not. 3 things in this speech. Firstly, set up on what the rise of parenting influences look like. Secondly, on the protection of children. And thirdly, on the inaccurate display of parenting within this media. Firstly, on what the rise of parenting influences look like. Well, broadly, it looks like the increase of popularity of influencers who are parents focusing their content, focusing the majority of their content on parenting and their lives with their kids. This also looks like increased popularity of audiences consuming that content. The rise of the influences, this rise influences of these influencers in 2 main ways. Firstly, it makes through making content with their kids, right? This is because kids are really cute and audiences like to watch them, and the influencer is now able to profit and also share their kid. But secondly, it makes content about their kids and their lives. It's centering around the content of their life as a parent. The likely comparative here is that influencers who are parents center their content around other things like fashion, gaming, or sports, and they keep content about their kids on their personal gallery. So what do parenting influencers care about? Well, we can see there's 2 things here. We see they're bad actors, there's also good actors. Well, what do the bad actors care about? They care about profit. They care about clout. They care about fame. They care about things like nurturing these kids and making them into people who they can profit off of. They care about exploitation, and they care about self-preservation. But what do good actors care about? Well, they just care about posting their day. They care about their children, and they probably don't want to exploit their kid. That's not their motivation here. They just post it for the sake of posting their kid or for documenting their child. But no, here the issue is that even if you're a good actor in this situation, your child can still be exploited. For example, you're just vlogging your kid and maybe your kid just yawns, but then someone can go in there and take a screenshot of your kid yawning and use that for other reasons. Onto the protection of children. Okay, 4 points to the context here. Why is the internet a dangerous place for children and minors when the content is specifically about them? Well, firstly, there's a lot of creeps and pedophiles online that hide behind burner accounts and VPNs. Secondly, when pictures or content of the children are posted, it can quickly spread to underground sites for trafficking, pornography, etc. Thirdly, extremely unregulated international law often isn't strict enough to deal with the issues that are being faced online. And fourthly, telegrams or entire groups dedicated to this negative child content are really prevalent. So how does the rise of parenting influences tarnish the safety of these children on the internet and in their personal lives? 5 myths here. Firstly, because content of children end up on other sites due to people like reposting it.
And then these sites can be dangerous if heavily unregulated for things like explicit content. For example, pornographic websites, Reddit, or Twitter. But it's also just really bad because the content is now out of the parents' hand. Secondly, because intimate and personal details of their life is shared. For example, a child's first period or the area that they live in. This means two main things. Firstly, it means a lack of privacy. So like 3 million followers now know when a child's first period is. But also it means that people online can estimate where the child or their family is from. Thirdly, in worser cases, this could force people to do things in the public eye, such as like wearing explicit clothes or, oh, cry harder, like emotionally burdening a child that is unable to differentiate what's real and what isn't for a camera. Fourthly, because you give pedophiles outlets and exposure to a wide range of children all at once, and there's a lot of a higher potential to be trafficked. And lastly, on cyberbullying. People on the internet are brutal, and this is because the internet is very unregulated. And when children grow up, they're going to start reading these comments, and they're going to begin to internalize the hate, and there's going to become mental health problem. So why is this important? Why is this like the most important thing we have to look at? Well, because children cannot consent to being filmed, posted, or have info revealed about them. This means not only do they get put into these dangerous situations, but they have no say in these things that are happening to them or being put up about them. On the flip side of things, if the rise of parenting influences did not exist and these influencers focused their content elsewhere and the videos of kids were being kept private, these kids are likely to become more protected and the info is kept private and safe. We should really weigh this point heavily on severity. Even just one singular child being subjected to these conditions can leave a long-lasting impact. I will take a point now if there is one.
Don't you think that pedophiles already have plenty of content of kids online to use if they want? Like, there's already been movies on TV in general. Like, this is just a small scale impact.
So you're saying you want to give pedophiles more content to use? I don't understand how that's like beneficial to either party in this case. Like, yes, there's already pornographic content, but why would we want to give them more material? Okay, moving on to my third point on how parenting influences inaccurately display parenting. So what is the context here? The journey of parenthood is often very complicated and unique, and there's a lot of different obstacles to tackle, which is dependent on each parent and each person. This means often like no two parents can share the exact same experiences, meaning there's no like all-encompassing journey that parents unanimously all relate to. Okay, 5 mechs here. Firstly, you do not need to be a good parent to be successful and thus an influence on media. A bad parent can become popular and push the wrong messages simply because they appeal to the algorithm. Secondly, this glamorizes parenthood. It shows off all of the good parts of parenthood, but it skips over the difficulties. It doesn't show the hardships and reality of parenting, and which is often a lot more difficult than meets the eye. Thirdly, there are a lot of other alternatives that are often more beneficial. For example, like reading a book or taking an online class, but also stuff like just talking to your family or your parents can be a lot more beneficial than going online and seeking it out on YouTube. Fourthly, you give parents like potentially negative ideals for children. This popularity then pushes ideas that fits trends and gets more views, meaning that you're intaking information that doesn't necessarily work, rather it just appeals to the algorithm. And fifthly, parenting influencers have a lot of money. Like when you search for something that you want to learn about on a platform, the likely first result you'll see is going to be the channel with like the most clicks and the most views. But because they're the channel that has really high engagement, it means they're likely like really rich. They make a lot of income, they make a lot of money. And that means a lot of parents aren't able to relate to their stories and relate to the life that they're living because they have like a 5-story house. And other people who have 5-story houses are often people who are richer. On to my impacts. My impacts here are threefold. Firstly, parents, especially younger parents, will turn to parenting influencers on guidance. When they are told like wrong things, it can lead to two main things in this case. Firstly, the kids is going to have like a worse condition to live through. But secondly, the parents is going to be a lot more stressed. Just simply imagine being like a young teenage parent who doesn't think she can get anything right because like when all you did was follow this YouTube video, but suddenly everything is going wrong because the same thing didn't apply to your kid. Secondly, the wrong message starts to get pushed. Like the trendy or viral topics may be adapted in order to appeal to like social media algorithm. just to make the influencers more money. And this means the content that is consumed, as mentioned, may not be applicable because it's just there to appeal to the algorithm. Like, again, just imagine being a parent who's looking for answers on the internet, but all you can find is just like something that's just the trend, right? And it's not actually applicable to what you're doing because the person that you're watching just wants to make money. But thirdly, it pushes the agenda that parenting is all about like sunshines and rainbows. And like, yeah, some of it is. We love babies, but like pushing the notion that it's all sunshines and rainbows is extremely harmful because it doesn't show the more difficult sides of parenting. At the end of this speech, we have proven how negative parenting influences can be. We win on severity. Even just a single child being subjected to being filmed is horrible. Even just one single parent being misled is horrible, let alone hundreds of thousands of them, with the number increasing more and more every single year. Proposed.
I know that's the speech, and now we'll have the first negating speaker begin with
Parents deserve to be informed, and kids deserve to have motivated parents. I'll be doing. I'll just first on the counterfactual. So on the counterfactual, we see that there is no content on social media related to parenting. And just to clarify, who is posting this content? Other parents sharing experiences with their kids. For example, this looks like what my kids ate today, or like how I resolved an issue with my child. These parents posting are likely to be ones who enjoy parenting, because in order for someone to create content, they need to have a passion for it, or else they'll just be posting in some other area. And parenting professionals are another party who are trained and educated in their fields and have a passion for the topic. Now, in this speech, I'll be going over a little bit of direct rebuttal, then onto my 2 points. Firstly, on why we get a more positive perspective on parenting, and secondly, on why the content is not likely to be harmful. So, on the direct rebuttal, just to some clarification. We focus on things directly on the act of parenting, not just kids being filmed. This motion explicitly states parenting influences. Therefore, you must be influencing the act of parenting, not just necessarily filming your kids doing random things. So we want to focus on things that that are focused on the child-adult interaction, or how the adult has dealt with child's issues, things that we define as parenting, not just child content that acts them to characterize. Right. On to the first point on why we get more positive parenting. For some context. Parenting at times can be really hard. It is expensive, it's mentally draining, and it is time consuming. Things that look obviously undesirable to those who want to become parents. 3 reasons to why we get a more positive perception of parenting. Firstly, influencers are more likely to produce feel-good content because that's what people engage with most. It looks like making jokes, like having a soothing song in the background, and being all around happy within this content. This creates a subconscious positive association within this content that people are then going to associate with parenting, because they've been provided that things like happy, like parenting can be cherished, and it can actually be a positive experience. This is what the audience is going to subconsciously associate. Secondly, the content is likely to be relatable for other parents because it will get more engagement and people can relate to the shared experience of the content. So when you see this, you feel affirmed, you no longer feel like you're alone in the struggle, and you are unlikely to get this from you are likely to get consuming content on social media because content creators from different backgrounds, like Affirmative said, no parents share the same story. I will integrate about all this later. And second, and B, when people see these relatable experiences, they're happy, they're making jokes, it makes perception of this activity better. Now, on the no parents share the same story. Well, yes, that is true, and that plays into our case because people will post different content based on different stories. You mentioned that only the good stuff will be posted. We extremely disagree with this statement. People will post things that other parents are interested in, and these other parents, like you stated, are interested in the hardships. And people will post on the hardships if there are people interested, if there are other parents interested in it. No, this is targeted toward parents, not the general population. So it'll be a parent-to-parent sort of content. Now, yes, we accept that influencers will like to produce different content the reason I just gave you, but they will also produce content on the hardships with a positive spin. And third reason for this, that we get more positive perception, is that seeing more parenting on social media makes people think it's more important and more relevant to society. Now, on to the comparative. When there's very little positive representation of parents in media, parents are less likely to view their role positively. More of their perception will be from their own experience and peers complaining. People are more likely, parents are more likely to complain to other parents about what little Jimmy just did yesterday that was naughty, rather than explaining in depth why they feel so grateful for having kids and the philosophy of why childbearing is a wonderful experience. Because it's a lot easier to just complain and focus on the negative stuff. And if we take away these positive influences from social media, then where are we going to find them elsewhere? People are just going to be complaining, it's talking to each other, and the perception will be from their own experiences. Now, if they are inexperienced, they are first-time parent who don't really know what they're doing because they haven't had any kind of educational help from the outside world in form of influences, then they're not going to know what to do, and their parenting is likely to be very unsuccessful. Therefore, their own perceptions will not be particularly positive. I'll take a point.
If people love complaining so much, why are people not likely to center around their content around that? If that's what's more engaging to people and gets people connected and engaged with content.
Okay, now good POI, but the motives of the influencers is to produce stuff that will get attention, and people are more likely to view positive content because that is their inherent nature. They like positivity. Now, as you said before, there is a demand for people looking for content on hardships, however this will be delivered in a positive way because no one wants to listen to why little Jimmy is bad and how I don't know how to fix it. They want to hear on strategies on how to deal with parenting issues, and they want to hear about it in a positive light. Now, on to the outcomes of this first point. Firstly, people are able to enjoy parenting as they subconsciously view it as a positive experience. They are less likely to doubt themselves in their decision. They are less likely to resent their kids for the struggles that they cause. Now, they now have the motivation to work through the struggles and are less likely to give up as a parent. Now that they have all this information and they know that they are not alone in these parenting struggles, they are going to endure and they are going to use these tactics they have seen work from other parents who are just sharing their take on parenting, trying to ensure that other people have things difficultly. Because, like I said, the motives of the influencer is to ensure that is to share their passion for parenting. So they'll be giving out good information. And the information that new parents now are consuming gives them that motivation to work through their struggles. Second impact is the parent-child relationship is better because parents are more motivated to spend time with them and work on strategies when times are tough. So, say for example, a parent watches a video of another parent explaining why it's so beneficial to spend time with your child. They're going to view this, they're going to see the impact that spending time with the child does, they're going to see how happy the child is, they're going to see how happy the parent is, and think, wow, that could be me. That's exactly what we want, and that's the impact that we get on this side of the house. We're going to get parents actually seeing things happen, and not just hearing about all the negativity from their peers, seeing positive things happen, and then, based on seeing those positive things happen, they're going to enact the actions they saw. Now, on to second point, why content is not likely to be harmful. Firstly, parents are rational adults who can assess the content for what it is. Now, Affirmative saying that parents are just going to watch wealthy content creators and feel really bad about them seeing a 5-story house. Well, they're obviously going to see that people in 5-story houses are not similar to them. They're not going to relate in any way possible. Interaction is the first point. There's going to be no relation there. They're going to have no shared values. They're just going to swipe. Like, why would they bother watching why some rich family is doing this when they don't really care? They want to see people who are similar to them and get proper advice. Come on, these are adults. Secondly, there is accountability for those content creators harming their kids. This is because people not only care about kids, but the parents making the content also care about their kids. So they're actually with love. Now, actually, the parents will post detrimental things about their kids that could lead to some kind of pornography thing. But we disagree about this because parents do have some sort of moral, they do have some sort of rationality. Now, there's a very, very slight chance there is a bad actor. This is very low impact because there are very few of them. In the majority, they are the characters that we get. And finally, there are fact checks on social media to ensure the stuff that is getting displayed is purely factual. Thank you.
I think that's speaking for this speech, and I'll come up with the second affirming speaker to speak the affirming
It is.
The negative team got up here and talked a lot to us about parenting content. How we should positively picture parents and the journey that they go through. This is an inherently flawed ideology to hold. Because as the first speaker talked about, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, man. Parenting is a very difficult journey. Having kids isn't easy. And when you have this concept of like always trying to paint them in a positive light, although coming from a good place, only detriments future parents and the current parents in the status quo and in the world. Two things in this debate. Firstly, I'll be responding to the main pushes that we've heard from the negating team, being firstly positive perceptions and harmful content, and secondly, I'll be going on to my split about how the rise of parenting influences detriment to their families. But firstly, I'll do some responses. Going over this idea of positive perception, a few responses to this. Firstly, we just see, as I started off with, it just starts to misinform and mischaracterize parenting to a lot of people that are looking at becoming parents. Because obviously, especially for the younger generations, those that are just getting into their 20s, getting into that age where you're starting to have parents, obviously when they look at this positive content, they're gonna do probably two things. Go, wow, this stuff looks way easier than I've been told it is. And secondly, I must be super duper able to do this. When in reality, the struggles of parenting are far greater than the negative team wants people to know. And secondly, we also see that it's just detrimental for those children that these parents do end up having. Because now these ill-equipped parents are stuck with these kids, going and looking at this going, well, okay, I'm a bit out of my depth here, which leads to a lot of detrimental parenting stuff, parenting styles and all of that kind of stuff. They also brought up this idea of feel good content and how that's the kind of thing that people want to see. That people, they only want to see like positive things, and that's why it's likely that these content creators will make that kind of content. Few responses to this. Firstly, we actually see it's more engaging for people to see, it's more profitable and engaging for these influencers to actually film the hardships and the arguments and that kind of stuff. Because that's what people want to see. People are engaged when they see arguments and stuff happen. That's why so many reality TV shows are so popular, because that's what the human mind, that's what the human mind feeds off. The human mind feeds off confrontation. The human mind enjoys seeing all of that negative stuff, which is why a lot of these parent influencers are so a lot of the content when you look at it on the status quo right now, it's so negative. If you look at things like Daddy 5, and other sort of parenting channels that focus around those that kind of concept, a lot of them have like their children going through these hardships. A lot of them having them playing pranks on their children, which are quite like negative, you know. And they also bring up this idea of the inherent nature of like these channels is to be like positive, and how all of that is enticing. This is like one of the biggest questions. It's like the only real mechanism we hear behind this point of this positive perception. And as I've just proved, you know, that's not actually the biggest driving force behind, you know, what kind of content people want to see. I'll take your point.
Will these young parents not have negative influences in their life? For example, their parents and friends, as well as our positive content to balance it out?
Now, you see, the problem with that is that when they look at this positive content and then reflect that with what they've already seen, they just see it contradicts themselves. Because when they look at that on the screen and they go, oh, wow, this is so great. And then they look at what happens in real life, they go, oh, where's the connection between that? How are they going to relate to something that's never actually happened to them before? How are they supposed to draw that connection that you guys talk about if they've never seen it in real life? You know, people, yeah, like, oh yeah, on Outside the House, when we show the struggles, when we show, well, like, you know, that stuff that goes on, it's more relatable and more easier for them to connect to. Yes. Moving on. They also talked about how there's the different perspectives of these people that make this parenting content, and how that makes it easier for people to relate to. Because, as we said, not every parenting journey is the same. There's a few responses to this. Firstly, we just see there's a large majority of, you know, there's a major point they tried to push, talking about how parents will now become like resentful towards their kids if they just see that negative content and that kind of stuff, and we'll just like start regretting having kids and all that kind of stuff. Three responses to this. First, we just see the general consensus around having kids is, you know, that it's positive. Like, yes, people obviously go into the parenting having the mindset that yeah, it's probably gonna be hard, but yet at the end of the day, we see that parents often really did want to have these kids, and secondly, you know, probably do love these kids regardless of the stress. So it's really unrealistic to come up here and claim that these parents are just going to start resenting their kids because of negative content. And that's a really shambolic and not very quintessential argument that they brought up in this debate. You know, they also talked about framing hardships in a positive light. A few responses to this. First, we just see it's highly unlikely that it's going to be engaging at the point where you're trying to frame like positive arguments. Because how do you have like a friendly grounding with your child, you know? How, like, firstly, how does that occur? And secondly, how is that then engaging to an audience you want to watch? And secondly, sure.
If parents really love their kids and don't resent them, then why do these bad actors in your world exist?
You see, that's because of the content. Thank you, you've helped me out there, mate. That's because of the content-driven incentives. Yes, there are good actors that just want to record their kids because they love their children. But on the flip side, we see on their side of the house, they uniquely have the harm where when these parents start making this content, when that content becomes profitable, that's when things like exploitation happen. That's when we start to get bad actors on their side of the house, because now parents are blinded by the fame, blinded by the money, and blinded by the success that these kids are now bringing them. And this is a point they never touch on in their speech. They haven't responded to it at all. Is this harm to the children? Yes, they can have all this great stuff about parents. Yes, we can give them all of that great stuff about, you know, positive parenting and all of that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, when we weigh that with, you know, harming kids, exploiting kids, you know, exposing them to this negative online world, we see this far greater outweighs this in this debate, especially because of the high mainstream relevancy that this content has. Makes it even worse, because now these children are being spread far and wide on these social media platforms. Yes. Moving on to the second part around harmful content. He didn't really get a lot of time to really explain on this, but the two main things we heard is that, you know, it's often parents these influencers won't make this kind of content because it's like not relatable, and this idea of accountability. A few responses to this. Firstly, we just see that a lot of the time this accountability doesn't really work in the hands of doesn't really work on this side of the house for a few reasons. Firstly, we just see a lot of the times it's easy for influencers to just cover up what they're doing. We see things like Daddy Five hiding these years of abuse that they did towards kids. Because, you know, obviously it's hard for the average person to go and investigate with the children. And what the influencer puts out there, yes, they can have this positive, really happy-go-lucky image, you know, I love my kids, but behind closed doors, we didn't understand what's going on. We didn't understand the true nuances of the situation. And secondly, we still see, as my first speaker said, that's online. And whenever you post content of your child online, it's susceptible to that exploitation by these bad people, as my first speaker brought up. And yeah, moving on to my split point around how it ruins families. But first, we see that when you start posting content around your family, when you start posting content around like being a parent, it obviously puts now a strain on your family because now they have to try and meet these expectations. They have to try and meet the happy-go-lucky image that the negating team likes to come up here and talk about. And it means you put a strain on those relationships. You make those relationships that are normally private now public, meaning two things. Firstly, families have to try and meet unrealistic expectations to help make more engageful content. And secondly, it also means you're just turning your family into a business, which is extremely detrimental. And that is why we propose.
I thank the speaker for the speech, and I will come up in a second negating speaker to the negating experience.
No one goes through 9 months of pregnancy and all the financial struggles of parenting just for the sake of some views on social media. I think the point at which Av's case is reliant on the fact that parents have no care for their kids and are willing to exploit them at the cost of getting some views is the point at which the case falls flat. A couple of things to look in the speech. Firstly, on some characterization on what influences care about, which is where I put my substantive contribution. Secondly, on the protection of children, and finally, on parenting information and perceptions of parenting. Firstly, then, on what do influencers care about. I think we hear from F that like there are going to be bad actors that purely care about exploitation, even if that is at the expense of the kids. Look, no one goes through 9 months of pregnancy and all the struggles of parenting in terms of like monetary time and stress, like purely for the means of making content. If all you care about is like views and profit, and that's the only thing that you care about in your whole life, there are probably just easier ways to do this without the other additional harms of having a kid. You're probably just gonna like make other types of content like memes or something that's just like easier to produce that doesn't come with all these harms. I don't think it's clear why anyone would go through all these inherent struggles that both sides agree exist purely for the sake of exploiting your kids. I think that's an unfair characterization, and I think that is what most of the cases continue on. Right. Now for my substantive contribution on who is actually producing this content. We tell you that it's probably going to be parents who enjoy parenting. 2 reasons for this. Firstly, they just have a passion for parenting. They want to share that with the world. They enjoy like looking after their kid and things like that. They want to share that with other people who maybe share similar experiences. But secondly, they're just going to be good at making this content. When you have like unique parenting methods and strategies that'll be interesting and informative parenting that people are going to watch and engage with, that's when you get views. Even if you buy that people do care to some extent about views, that is when you get the best way to get views is by being good at parenting. What does this mean in this way? 2 things. Firstly, it means that parents who are like either producing just false content or just like really harmful content get no engagement because parents don't want to just like constantly be watching content that makes them horrible. Like you can choose what you see on social media to an extent because you can control your algorithm by like liking videos and stuff like that. And so people just won't engage with this content. But secondly, parenting influencers will just not be willingly exploiting their kids because they love them, right? Your bond doesn't really get much stronger than the one with your parent because you're literally born with, like, they give you life, they feed you, they're the ones who make you who you are. And so I just don't think that parents are going to have much of an incentive to completely not care about the kid. I think what that means then is that even if you buy that the harms of like protection to children do exist, I think you should at least buy that they're just like at a very minimal scale, because like no parents are even going to be producing content that puts their children in such a vulnerable scenario. Moving on then to ASCII push on the protection of children. The first thing they tell us is that like there's heaps of creeps on the internet, and that people will like be finding out details about the kid. A couple of responses here. Like, firstly, as I already mentioned, parents just love their kids and like would want to protect their privacy. No parent wants people showing up to their house to like see their kid or something like that, and they also just want to protect their own privacy to the same extent. But secondly, it's just unclear why any of these harms are particularly likely. Like, it's very hard to find somebody's address from like one video inside their house. It's not very easy to do that. I don't think people are going to be coming and like showing up to your house. Parents probably don't want to share that for their own interests as well, because they like to live with the kid and it's like the same house. And thirdly, like this content just won't perform well if something's like really horrible and exploitative of a kid. That will just be censored by the algorithm, because that is not something that is like within the terms and services of these social media platforms. Thirdly, like there's just not that many people that are this like insanely like this like. There aren't many pedophiles in the world, basically. Like, there's just not a huge market for like child pornography and things like that. And so I just don't think it's going to turn as like a massive harm. We have swarms of people showing up people's houses trying to exploit these kids. But finally, I think the content about kids existing, right? Because I think most of the harms just based on the fact that like content about kids exists and that ends up on other sites. That's just not exclusive to parenting influences. We tell you that the content we're seeing is about the process of parenting. It's about looking after your kid, or like the struggles that you face, changing their diapers, cooking for them, things like that. Videos of kids just being cute and stuff like that exist in either world outside of the context of parenting influences. And I think that is the point at which most of their harms are probably just symmetric. The next thing they tell us is on cyberbullying. Look, people just don't really bully kids, because like why would you want to do that? That's like kind of crazy. But secondly, like it's not the kids that are producing the content, and so the kids don't really like see any of this media. And thirdly, there are just ways to work around this. You can turn off the comments, you can like minimize engagement, you can block people, things like that. Okay, at the end of this point on child protection, I think we should believe that firstly, not many parents will willingly put their kids into such a vulnerable position where they're at the cost of actually being exploited or posted on like pornographic websites. But secondly, it's just unlikely that any of these things are even going to happen, because people are not that crazy. Moving on then to inaccurate parenting information and the perceptions of parenting. What do we hear from ACT? The first thing they tell us is that no two parents will share the same experiences. Two responses here. Firstly, there just are many similarities in parenting. Things like changing diapers, things like seeing their first steps. What this means then is that parents seeing this content, like probably see things that are relatable to them. We mentioned this at Riley. It's probably going to be content that lots of people can engage with, relate to, and enjoy. But secondly, even if you are watching content that shows experiences that are different to your own, that's probably just a good thing. You're opened up to the different portrayals of parenting, the nuances that may exist, new strategies and things like that. That is when you get people knowing how to parent better. But secondly, they tell us that bad parents could probably just blow up because of like the algorithm. I think that's as far as it goes. The first thing to say here is that these people just don't get engagement because they're making bad content, as I mentioned in my split. They can't make like funny, relatable parenting jokes if they just fully hate their kid. No one's going to watch this like boring content. But secondly, even if they do blow up, two responses here. Just on fact checking, right? People can like say firstly in the comments that this content is horrible and an incorrect, inaccurate depiction of parenting. But secondly, you have like the AI, TikTok, and Instagram fact checkers and things like that. But B, parents are just relatively like rational and mature people. They're like old and they've been through a lot of like life experience, so they can just decipher dumb content and know when it's not something worth listening to or caring about. The third thing they tell us is that this content just doesn't show the hardships of parenting. Look, this just isn't the case because of what we told you at Riley. The most relatable content is what it gets the most engagement, because that is what the largest market of people are going to enjoy and care about and like or comment on. Because of this, we say that you just get a range of different portrayals of the nuances in parenting that includes the difficulties, that includes benefits. Next, they tell us that you get like negative ideals because influencers are all really rich. Firstly, influencers just aren't hugely rich. Social media is like hugely saturated field. There are just lots of influencers all producing in this area. But secondly, if this content is so far from what people who watch it actually experience, we'll just swipe because it does nothing for them. It's not related to them. It doesn't make them feel good. No one wants to watch that. What then are the impacts of getting better perceptions of parenting? This is our path to victory. We tell you that parents who struggle on their own often fall into cycles of isolation. They feel like they're alone in the inherent struggles that they face as a result of parenting, right? Because the issues that are most proximate to them are the ones of like stress and not having much money to put food on the table for yourself or for your kid. That is what people focus on. It's very difficult to like be thinking about the long-term benefits or satisfaction of like having a child when you have no money. When these parents now see heaps of other parents depicting the different aspects of these universal struggles, they know that they aren't the only ones going through it, that other people are going through it too. It's then easier for them to work through the hard times, to focus on the positives, because they know that it's not just them. They know that it's something that's universal to parenting and to having kids. What we tell you is that the most vulnerable group in this debate is the single mother who feels depressed and isolated due to the hardships of parenting. She now knows that she's not alone. She now knows that she has a way to get through this and to feel good at the end of the day. That's what you care about. That is what
Thank that speech for the speech. I now upward from the your friend. Yes.
The strategy of the negating team in this debate is extremely flawed because their entire case relies on the idea that their key outcome in this debate, the best outcome they could possibly get, is the idealization of parenting. If we can prove that not only that doesn't matter, but that safety of children should be the thing that you prioritize most in this debate, we ultimately win. Even if they prove that parenthood is likely to have a more positive perception, I'm going to prove why that's a bad thing anyway and why they lose on that point. But firstly, I'm going to talk about I'm going to give some clarification about the type of content that we're talking about in this debate, and I'll move on, and then I'll move on to talking about bad actors. Okay, so for clarification, I think that the most reasonable thing to assume in this debate is that the content is likely to be a mixture of your feel-good and feel-good content, as well as the sort of content that's really radical, that's really bad, right? I'm going to explain why we win on both fronts later, but note that's information that we give you down the line, and it's that humans naturally feed off of confrontation, right? They literally admit to the problem in the current status quo being that parents complain a lot about their children. We're unsure as to why they're not likely to do this online if that is currently what is the trend, is to complain about your children, right? That's super unclear. Okay, firstly, I'm going to talk about bad actors, right? For the rest of the speech, I'm going to sort of talk through the lens that these parents do have good intentions and why we still win on that front. But I'm going to first explain to you why bad actors do in fact exist. The thing and the harm that's exclusive to their side of the house is you now put profit and fame in sort of the context of parenting, right? They say that nobody goes through 9 months of labor to sort of profit off of their child, which may be true, right? But we say that when you're ultimately blinded by fame, when you're ultimately blinded by financial incentives, that can lead you to do a lot of crazy things when your livelihood is based on your income, is based on content where you film your children, right? This can lead to things like sexualization. So filming your your daughter eating a banana in her dance costume, which may seem kind of permissible at first, but to pedophilic echo chambers on the internet, that's clearly very attractive. Or secondly, it just looks like coercing them to do things like cry or just being abused for the spectacle. They barely engage with that material. I'm gonna respond to all of this response that they gave as to why it was inadequate. But note that people who shouldn't have kids anyway, right? Oftentimes, even if they already have a child, they were probably not a good parent before the content. They're probably not going to be a good parent after the content, right? This responds to the rationality point of why parents are likely to be rational. But I'm going to talk about why even if parents are rational, they still get abused for the spectacle. Two things. Firstly, on the safety of children and why that's the most important thing in this debate. Secondly, on the idealization of parenthood. Okay, firstly on safety. What do we tell you? We tell you that aside from the bad actors, even if you swap that out, the main point we want to make here is that the quintessential part of rise narratives is that you increase the availability of something. You increase the availability of content of children. They say that these pedophilic echo chambers don't exist. There's not a huge market of pedophiles. Firstly, I would just say we're all minors here. We're probably not in these echo chambers, so we don't likely know a lot of about them because, as we said, they're probably really unregulated. And secondly, we know that they're huge because these echo chambers have been exposed in the past. There were extremely large Reddit and Twitter threads of just children in dance suits, of children yawning with their mouths open, and we think that's really disgusting, and it's a thing that the rise of this narrative actively perpetuates. The second thing that they say here is that the algorithm censors these types of things. We tell you that no, if it's something that is as permissible as a cow eating a banana, genuinely that's quite innocent to the algorithm. But when you screenshot that, take it out of context, and put it into a Reddit thread full of millions of children, right? We tell you that that's something that's extremely harmful and a unique harm on their side of the house, right? Even if we claim that parents are rational and care about their children, right? If we take their best example as to, these parents are going to be just changing their kids' diapers, that's still really invasive, that's still really weird, and that still invades your sense of privacy that we told you at first was extremely important, right? But even the fact that, as we noted at first, the fact that these videos can be taken out of context, can be taken out of the hands of these parents who are rational, these parents that care about their children, we think that's just an inherently bad thing, right? Then they just tell us that cyberbullying doesn't really exist because, who wants to bully a child? That's just weird. I'm sorry, that's just an assertion. Kids get bullied all the time on the internet. We think that in order to protect the safety of kids, we think that the comparative is far more preferable. People are likely to complain about their children on either side of the house. The real comparative is that videos of your children in their dance costume stay in your private camera roll, and they don't go onto the internet to go through these echo chambers of old men, old women, just sort of preying on your kids, trying to find where they are, and essentially just sexualizing them. We think that's really disgusting. We think that that is the most important thing in this debate. And we tell you that when you increase the availability of this content, when you increase the availability of content about children and their daily lives, you get these kind of harms. They never dealt with that adequately. I've responded to basically everything they've said in response. None of it was adequately dealt with it. Alright, so what am I going to adequately deal with? I'm going to adequately deal with their main push, which is on the idealization of parenthood. But before I get into that, I'll take the POI.
Why is a random photo of a kid in a dance costume exclusive to parenting content specific?
Because there's more of it. Alright. Idealization of parenthood. Okay, note that this is contingent on feel-good content actively impacting people's perception. We see that this isn't really likely for a few reasons. Firstly, because oftentimes we just noted to you what's likely to be engaging is seeing kids crying, seeing people pull pranks on their children, seeing that kind of thing, and oftentimes feel-good content is just not what reaches people. But secondly, note that oftentimes if you are watching a YouTube video and you go, and people ask you, why do you want a child? And you go, it's because I watched the LeBron Family and it looks really cool. I feel like I do a good job. That, you probably shouldn't have a child, right? I'm going to explain to you why, even if they get every single benefit of the fact that the perception of parenthood is perceived as better, I'm going to explain to you why that's not important and why you should not weigh that heavily in the debate at all. They say it's because three reasons. Firstly, because not everybody should be a parent. If the best case on their side of the house is that everybody becomes a parent, I just think that's a huge harm in itself. Literally, in the last speech that we just heard, we hear that on the counterfactual, parents are going through cycles of stress because they have not enough money to put food on the table. I'm so sorry. Why should we be idealizing parenthood for people who can't put food on the table, alright? Okay, but secondly, right, like I said, You shouldn't become a parent if you watch a YouTuber. But 3, note the great material we gave you at Cadell as to why this tarnishes families, right? As to why profiting and marketing off of your family as opposed to keeping it private is extremely harmful, is extremely detrimental to the perception of parenthood. Because rather than enjoying and spending time with your children, instead, what happens is you profit off of them, you look at comments and you sort of internalize them in the context of your family. We think that's extremely bad, right? We think that you should weigh this debate on the protection of children and not useless sort of like rhetoric about why everybody having children and why positive perceptions of that are good.
I think that's the speech, and I'll prefer negating speaker
I'm going to do 3 things in this speech. First, I'll clarify what this content actually looks like and what is within the scope of the debate. Secondly, I'll talk about the perception of parenting, specifically for parents, as they are the people who like the perception of parenting is most important for, obviously. And thirdly, I'll talk about the exploitation of kids. Before that, I just want to deal with this point that got brought up about why having more parents is a bad thing. We just don't think it's relevant in the debate because people aren't usually pushed over the edge when they want to be a parent by random TikTok, right? If they're not financially able to support a kid, we think that are more like most people, like almost all people are rational enough to prioritize more realistic reasons to not have kids over like a YouTube video that makes it look cool. But we also tell you that if the only reason that people aren't having kids is because they don't realize that kids can be cool and cute and fun, then maybe these people should be having kids because maybe they'll find out. I think it's quite likely that they will find out that the reason that they might not be having kids is just because of maybe incorrect societal perception that we characterize from the start of our first speech. Anyway, onto the clarification of this type of content. We just want to say that Yeah, sure.
If parents are busy and time poor, why are they spending time watching the LeBron family?
Okay, so this is actually interesting because what I'm about to talk about right now, which is that the LeBron family, parents aren't watching the LeBron family, is my point, right? Their content is targeted at kids. 20-minute videos of sister pranks brother, water balloon, crazy, you won't believe what happens next. Is not obviously targeted at parents, which makes all our points about the perception of parenting so much stronger. Because as parents are more rational than kids, as parents aren't interested by this type of brain dead content, the content that they are absorbing and the content that we're talking about is more likely to be realistic. And I'll talk about this later. So first of all, content that doesn't focus on parenting, or it's a minority of the purpose, just isn't parenting content. So we think that a lot of the more radical stuff just more crazy stuff just isn't really relevant. But we also tell you that parents don't really watch this stuff, and I've already talked about that. But then, okay. So parents aren't going to be watching the LeBron family most of the time, and so then on this point about the perception of parenting, we think that it's pretty fair to say that because parents can reinforce their own algorithms and choose what they want to watch, they're just not going to be watching this stupid content. What are they going to be watching? They're going to be watching content they find interesting as intelligent adults and content that they find relatable. Okay, so we've characterized that parenting can be really hard. There's lots of hard stuff that happens, and because people find it easy to focus on the proximate hard stuff rather than the more subtle fulfillment that they get from parenting. We think that in society there is a general focus on the bad in parenting, and this is really harmful for parents, right? In in their side, right, we see that parents are just much more likely to forget why they do it because they're not being reminded by this content all of the good things that can happen from parenting. We see that in this content, what we see is that we've told you why it's like to feel good, right? This looks like two things. Firstly, it's going to portray negative experiences in a positive light. So this looks like, in general, if you're telling a funny story about your kid, right? It's not just going to be this creator whining about it, because no one's going to watch that. They'll be telling jokes, and because they're a likable creator, it will just make more positive association. We also tell you this is going to portray positive experiences in general videos, like, hey, my kid had their first dips, like all this like good stuff, So then when people see, the main rebuttal to this is that when people see these positive experiences, they're just going to think, I'm not good enough, I'm bad, this is so bad. We think that first of all, people just feel this in either world, right? Like if they're doing bad, they're going to be having these thoughts anyway. So instead, we tell you that this only counteracts that by making people see, like, focus on the good rather than bad. We also tell you that they just aren't going to be comparing themselves to millionaires. As first of all, people, like, this will be symmetrical in either world. People are just constantly comparing themselves to millionaires. But also, we just think that adults are rational enough to not do this. So, at the end of this, we tell you that parents in general will just feel more positively about parenting. And this has massive impacts, right? We tell you that when you're coming home from your 9 to 5 and you see a TikTok on the bus where some creator that you like and watch frequently is like laughing about some funny story with their kid, right, when they did something stupid. Then you come home and your toddler's grabbed a permanent marker and drawn like all over the walls, and it's just being a complete pain in the ass. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I can say that. And just more likely to be able to get through this horrible experience. Maybe not beat your kid, maybe not resent your kid, maybe just like be like a better parent. Like we see this can happen in lots of different circumstances. Or maybe like when you just go through a really hard time with your kid and then you see some TikTok where someone is being really positive about their kid, you're just more likely to be able to look past the hard stuff, think about the good stuff. The impacts of this are pretty clear, right? When people just feel more positively about parenting, they're going to be better parents. The parents are going to have more validated, more fulfilled lives, and the kids are going to grow up to be better. And we think the scale of this immediately just takes almost all of the material out of the debate, because when we're affecting the millions of people that these TikToks and videos reach, and seeing how so many more people become better parents, we just see like huge outcomes for way more people than they can ever claim, because we just don't think many kids are being exploited on their side. That's what I'm going to talk about now, right? We told you from the start that like the vast majority of parents like have the incentive that they love their kids. It's biological. And we've also told you that even if they are profit motivated, like exceptionally bad content just won't perform well on the algorithm. First of all, because people see through it and it's stupid. Second of all, if it's like softcore, like child stuff, it's going to get censored because YouTube doesn't want to be associated with that. TikTok doesn't want to be associated with that. So the algorithm will censor it. So we think that the scale of harms of parents that are actually, of these bad actors they talk about, are going to be small because there's not a huge incentive for it. We also think that some of the more extreme stuff falls out of the debate because it's more like, it's not really focused on parenting content. On to their points about privacy, we just think that first, we've already responded to this. Okay. We also tell you that although they say like the rise of this content like means that there's just more harm caused by this exploitation, we tell you that when there is already content of kids out there, and your average pedophile can like just go onto Facebook, follow some people, and see their kids on Facebook because like that's just something they can do. That there are already kids in media everywhere. We just don't think that there is a massive increase in exploitation, in like the sort of harms that they talk about, because it exists on either side. And we also tell you that when this exploitation is so rare, the harms of it are just small, and they're also like not super proximate to the kids themselves. It sounds bad to say, but like, yeah, I'm actually not going to say that. But oh God. All right. Okay. So at the end of this, when we think there are just incentives to not exploit kids because exploitative content performs badly, and also parents love their kids, and also the people who are like to abuse this content just like super, it's not very exclusive or very relevant. We just think that a lot of the exploitation falls out of the debate. And at worst, the most you can do it is you just can't weigh it very highly, because a lot of these influences, like there just aren't that many of them in the world. Thank you.
unfortunately, that's the C channel from up to past, but the negating pie.
Parenting content is about the process of parenting. If you buy that parents really are so evil, I think they're probably just going to post random photos of their kids in dance costumes in either way. Two things to look at here. Firstly, on the perceptions on parenting, and secondly, on child protection. Firstly, on the perceptions of parenting. This is the most important point for two reasons. Firstly, on vulnerability. The single mothers who have no money and are under huge loads of stress to look after their children have this burden lightened because they have accessible material about parenting that they can relate to and that they feel affirmed in. But secondly, on scale, as we told you down the line, social media just has the unique capacity to spread relatability to huge numbers of people because it is so accessible, because everyone scrolls on like TikTok. The scale of like pedophile echo chambers, which I think is like the extent of Af's path to victory, is just never portrayed. I don't think it's clear why it's likely to be such a massive harm, why so many people are going to be like doing pedophilic things when that is just illegal. We dealt with why this is low scale. What did we tell you? We tell you that the people making this content is likely to be people who love parenting because they're passionate at it and because they're good. What this means then is that you're going to get relatable, like positive content with like soothing, like songs in the background that portrays the experiences of parenting. They tell us that parents are blinded by fame and will exploit their kids no matter what. Look, even if that's true and we take them at their best, the analysis is just unclear regarding why this leads to exploitative parenting content. Like we tell you that people who are just like fully crazy and willing to go through like the clear harms of exploitation are just probably symmetric because this niche still exists for like people to post these random videos that have nothing to do with actually parenting your kid. But B, these people can just make other content that is easier and that they're better at. They don't have to go through the harms of like looking after a kid. If all they want is exploitation and profit, they can just do other things on social media. Social media is like uniquely has like a uniquely broad capacity to have a lot of avenues to like see success. But C, we just tell you that parents are rational and mature. They love their kids and just won't exploit them because you created that kid. Like there's no bond that you have in the world that's stronger than the one that you have with your kid. People are going to like think about this before they post content. They could potentially exploit the person that they love the most in the world. What should you believe in? Firstly, I think just like random content of like photos of kids eating bananas is symmetric. Like this has nothing to do with parenting, and parenting is what this debate is about. But secondly, people with kids feel affirmed in their struggles. They escape the cycles of isolation and desperation that are all too easy to fall into when you're stressed and you have to work heaps to look after your kid. They're more likely to work through these hard times and see the positive. We told you that this benefits both the child and the parent because you get a better child-parent relationship because the parent is more likely to like spend time with their kid and like value this relationship more. Okay, moving on to protection of children. I think I've already explained what's like incredibly low scale in this debate and why it is not important. But I think what like the crux of Af's case here is that like people will like find out details about the kid and that leads to really big harms. I think we told you several things, which is just that it's not in the parents' interest to do things that will exploit their kids. But secondly, it's just not very common to get these kinds of things like people finding people's addresses because that's just not easy, not common. And thirdly, this content just won't perform well because of the mechanisms of censorship, both through like people posting in the comments, "Ooh, this content is disgusting," like reporting the creator and things like that. But secondly, just like YouTube does not want to have child pornography on their website. They're going to take this down because that is within their own interest. It's against their terms of service. We explain that down the line. I think we should believe at the end of this debate is that the most important thing is the parents who probably feel under AF that they have no way of getting out of the struggles of parenting, that they are the only ones who have to change diapers 10 times a day and like work 9 to 5 every single day to look after their kid. These are the people who we uniquely benefit. Proud to
Oh, wait, yeah. I mean, do that. I now can't reply. Thanks, Manukau. Go.
28 minutes. That is how long Negating spent pushing how no exploitative parents exist for like any sort of content. I really do not think they can claim this to the extent they have. But okay, let's buy into this. In fact, let's buy into their best case scenario. Even in their best case scenario, there are still many issues, and the reasoning here is threefold. Firstly, the biggest issue, child pornography still exists. Negating has slightly contended the situation by trying to outline how, like, no matter what happens, there will still be child pornography. I do not think this is an excuse. What we should be doing instead is trying to mitigate this, not excuse it. The Negating side of the house pushes the pornographic exploitation even if only good actors exist. Good actors can still act as a medium for exploitation, as you have heard, at first, at second, and at third. Again, for example, a harmless gymnastics routine can be screenshotted, edited, and shared through different private groups where these good actors couldn't access it even if they wanted to. This is such an important aspect to this debate that's like always an ever-growing issue on the Negating side of the house that they cannot mitigate. But now, secondly, the harmful content is still being pushed. Nothing is being changed, and that is the issue here. Harmful content, such as glamorization or unrelatable information, is still going to be prevalent on the internet. On top of that, diluted content due to virality and trends still exists. Again, the content that appeals to the algorithm will be the ones that appear first. And Negating have tried to explain how, like, what you like or what you can change the algorithm. And we agree, but that's not the issue here. The issue is when a new parent or an expecting parent engages with parenting influence content for the first time, it's still going to be a rich family with 5 stories and 13 PlayStation 5s, which is completely unrelated. And thirdly, on the invasion of privacy. Negating side of the house still pushes for an invasion of privacy. Even innocent content can be an invasion of privacy because children cannot consent. So no content should be pushed in the first place. Any content is an invasion of privacy. It is an invasion of privacy even for something unharmful. Even if we are charitable here and say that Negating does not stand for invasion of privacy, it is still an indirect outcome on their side of the house that we cannot ignore. But let's flip this now, and let's look at the pushes on our side of the house. Firstly, we push for the protection of the children. We push for the protection of the privacy of children. This is like keeping sweet videos in your camera roll, where you can scroll through in like 10 years' time and look at it later. But we also push for protecting the integrity of families. This is by two main ways. Firstly, not abusing them for the spectacle, but also spending time with the family for the principle of it and not for the views. So let's take a step back here and let's weigh up the outcomes of both sides of the house. Negating pushes for two main things here. Firstly, for help for parents, and secondly, for connection. Note that this isn't mutually exclusive because we want that too. Neg cannot claim mutual exclusion when it is symmetric. But on top of that, our side of the house also stops misconception. But most importantly, we protect children. We protect families. You should weigh the safety of kids and families higher than parenthood perception. We have pushes with proper mechanization where Negating lacks engagement. Irregardless of how many positive things you see on the internet, it does not change what truly matters: the safety of your own child. We win on scale through protecting a large number of children, but also the scale of abused children is much higher on their side of the house. But we also win on severity through protecting children. We outweigh these through protecting children. We protect children, and we stand for protecting children. For both. What did you think, Karen?
I thank everyone for that day. I invite you things to cross the floor and shake hands. I'm gonna
You can give him